Everyone tells you that home is the one place in the world where you're never afraid, until a stranger you hired to fix your furnace texts you that there's someone breathing behind a wall in your own basement, and you realize you've never actually walked every inch of the house you've lived in for 11 years. My name is Gary Whitfield. I'm 47 years old, and I live in Marsh Hollow, Indiana, in a 2-story colonial on Deer Path Lane that my wife and I bought the year we got married. The kind of house where I still, out of habit, check that the back door is locked twice before bed, even though nothing in 11 years had ever given me a reason to. I used to believe that the person who shares your mortgage, your holidays, and your bed for over a decade couldn't possibly be keeping a locked room from you. I was wrong, and it took a stranger with a flashlight and a confused text message to show me exactly how wrong. Before I tell you what happened, I want to ask you something small. If you've ever had that cold, sinking feeling that something in your own home wasn't quite what it seemed, hit subscribe. It costs nothing, but it means you're still with me, and that matters more than you'd think. Now let me tell you about my wife. Her name is Denise Whitfield, and we've been married for 16 years. In that time, I thought I'd learned every corner of her. She drank her tea with a single spoon of honey, never sugar, and always let it steep for exactly 4 minutes, timed on her phone. She kept a small collection of ceramic birds on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, each one purchased on a different trip we'd taken together, and she dusted them every Sunday morning without fail. She had a habit of humming show tunes under her breath while she folded laundry, always slightly off the rhythm of the actual song. She never let anyone else load the dishwasher, insisting there was a correct way that nobody else could seem to master. She traveled for work fairly often, her job in regional sales for a medical supply company taking her to Atlanta, Louisville, sometimes Nashville, usually for 3 or 4 days at a stretch, and I'd never once questioned those trips, because questioning felt like something small, suspicious husbands did, and I never wanted to be that. I thought 16 years bought you the right to stop wondering. I was about to learn that it doesn't buy you anything at all if the person across from you has been building something you were never supposed to see. The week before it happened was about as ordinary as they come. Denise left for a 4-day trip to Atlanta on a Monday morning, kissing me goodbye in the driveway, with her rolling suitcase bumping against her heel, telling me not to forget to water the ferns on the back porch. I went to work at the county assessor's office, where I've been employed for 19 years, came home, watched the Reds lose a close one, and noticed on Wednesday evening that the basement felt colder than usual, the furnace cycling on more often than it should have for early October. Nothing about that week suggested anything was coming. That's usually how it goes, isn't it? The disaster never announces itself. It just waits quietly in the basement, behind a wall you've walked past 1,000 times. I called Blevins Heating and Air on Thursday morning after the furnace made a grinding noise that scared me enough to shut it off entirely. They sent out a technician named Curtis Odom, a heavy-set man in his mid-30s, with a Blevins polo shirt and a work van that idled loudly in my driveway. I let him in, showed him down to the basement, and went back upstairs to keep working from my laptop at the kitchen table, figuring he'd be down there an hour, maybe less, same as every other furnace call I'd ever had in this house. About 40 minutes later, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from a number I didn't recognize, though the area code matched the one Curtis had used to confirm the appointment earlier that morning. "Mr. Whitfield, quick question. Sorry to bother you upstairs." I typed back, "No problem. What's up?" "There's a locked door behind your storage shelves down here. Back corner past the water heater. Looks like it leads to another room. Is that a crawl space, or is it finished back there?" I sat there for a second, genuinely confused, running through the layout of my own basement in my head. The furnace, the water heater, the shelving unit Denise had insisted on installing 3 years back to organize the holiday decorations, and beyond that, as far as I'd ever known, just poured concrete and the foundation wall. I typed back, "What door? We don't have any locked rooms down there, man. That's just the foundation wall behind the shelves." The 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, the way they do when someone's trying to figure out how to say something carefully. "Sir, I'm looking right at it. There's drywall, built out about 4 feet past where the shelving unit sits, and there's a steel door set into it. It's got 4 padlocks on the outside, all different brands, like they were added at different times. I moved a couple totes to get a better look, and I can hear breathing on the other side. I knocked once and it went quiet, but I can still hear it now, real shallow. I read that text 3 times before my brain fully processed it. My hands went cold in a way I can't fully explain. A physical sensation like the temperature in the kitchen had dropped 10 degrees in the space of 1 sentence. I typed back, my thumbs clumsy on the screen. Are you serious right now? Dead serious, sir. I don't want to touch those locks or say anything else through that door without you knowing first. But there's definitely someone in there. I stood up from the kitchen table so fast the chair scraped hard against the floor, and I called 911 before I even finished reading his last message twice. Here's something nobody tells you about the moment your own house stops feeling safe. It doesn't happen gradually. It happens in the space of 1 text message, 1 sentence from a stranger standing in a room you've walked past 1,000 times. And after that sentence, nothing about the house you've lived in for 11 years feels the same again, not even the parts you're standing in right now. 2 Marsh Hollow patrol officers arrived within 9 minutes, followed shortly after by a 3rd car, and, not long after that, a sergeant named Wexler, who introduced himself with a firm handshake and an expression that told me he took this seriously before he'd even seen the door himself. Curtis Odom stood off to the side of my driveway, visibly shaken, wringing a rag between his hands, repeating to anyone who'd listen that he'd only wanted to check the return air duct routing behind the shelving unit, that he wasn't trying to snoop, that he just happened to see the drywall didn't match the rest of the foundation and got curious enough to move a few totes. I led the officers down to the basement myself, my legs feeling strange beneath me, like I was walking through someone else's house wearing my own body. And there it was, exactly as Curtis had described, a section of drywall built out roughly 4 feet past the natural line of the foundation, painted the same flat gray as the rest of the basement walls, clearly meant to blend in unless you were looking for it. A steel door, windowless, set into a simple wood frame, 4 padlocks, mismatched, hanging from hasps that had clearly been installed at different times, based on how the screws didn't quite match, and the paint around 2 of them looked newer than the other 2. Sergeant Wexler knocked twice, loudly, and identified himself. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. Then, faint but unmistakable, I heard it too, a small shuffling sound, and something that might have been a voice, though I couldn't make out words. Sir, is there someone who lives with you that we don't know about? A relative? Anyone staying here? Wexler asked me directly, and the way he asked it, flat and careful, made it clear he wasn't ruling out the possibility that I already knew exactly what was behind that door. No, I said, and I heard my own voice crack slightly on the word. I swear to you, I have never seen this door in my life. I didn't even know this space existed. It took the locksmith they called in almost 40 minutes to defeat all 4 padlocks, each one a different mechanism, clearly chosen and installed with real deliberation rather than convenience. When the door finally swung open, the smell hit first, stale air, and beneath it, something human, something that had been living in an enclosed space far too long. And there, in a room no bigger than a walk-in closet, lit only by a small battery lantern on the floor, sitting on a cot with a thin blanket pulled up to her chest, blinking hard against the sudden light from the hallway, was a woman I had never seen before in my life. She looked to be somewhere in her mid-20s, thin in a way that made my stomach turn, with matted dark hair and eyes that took a long moment to focus on the officers, on me, on anything at all. An EMT who'd arrived shortly before the door opened moved past me immediately, kneeling down, speaking in the low, practiced voice they use for exactly this kind of moment. The woman didn't scream. She didn't fight. She just looked at all of us with an expression I still can't fully describe. Something between disbelief and a kind of exhausted relief, like a person who had stopped expecting the door to ever open again. "What's your name, sweetheart?" the EMT asked her gently. It took her a long moment to answer, her voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Marisol," she said. "Marisol Reyes." Here's something nobody tells you about the moment your entire life becomes a crime scene. It doesn't feel real, even while it's happening directly in front of you. I stood in the hallway of my own basement, 12 feet from a locked room I hadn't known existed, watching paramedics carefully help a stranger to her feet, and I understood for the first time that being innocent doesn't feel like safety. It feels like standing in a room where everyone else is trying to figure out how much you knew, and you're the only one who genuinely doesn't know anything at all. They took Marisol out on a stretcher, though she insisted, weakly, that she could walk, wrapped in a silver emergency blanket, and I watched the ambulance pull out of my driveway, with its lights on, but no siren, turning quietly onto Deer Path Lane, like it didn't want to wake the neighbors. Sergeant Wexler asked me to sit down at my own kitchen table, in my own house, and answer questions like I was the one who'd done something wrong. And in that moment, I couldn't even blame him for it. I would have looked at me with suspicion too. He asked how long I'd owned the house. 11 years, I told him. He asked whether I'd ever had any renovation work done in the basement. I told him about the shelving unit Denise had installed 3 years back, the one Curtis had needed to move totes away from to even see the drywall in the first place. He asked whether my wife had access to the house without me, whether she ever came and went at times I wasn't home, whether she had any storage units, second properties, family connections in the area I might not know about. I answered every question honestly, and watched him write things down, without changing his expression, the same way Detective Holloman had written things down in a story I'd later hear from a man named Daniel, 2 towns over, though of course, I didn't know that yet. "Mr. Whitfield, I have to ask you plainly," Wexler said, closing his notebook halfway. "Is there any chance your wife knew about this room?" I opened my mouth to say absolutely not, and then I stopped, because the honest answer was that I genuinely didn't know, and that not knowing terrified me more than almost anything else that had happened that day. I called Denise in Atlanta immediately after the police left, my hands shaking so badly I had to try 3 times to get her name selected in my contacts. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and normal, asking how my day was going, and I remember standing in my own kitchen, staring at the basement stairs, unable to make myself say the words for a long moment. "Denise, there was a room in our basement, behind the shelving unit, a locked room. There was a woman inside it." The silence on the other end of that call lasted exactly 4 seconds. I know, because I counted them, staring at the phone's timer without meaning to. 4 full seconds of dead air before Denise said, in a voice that had gone strangely flat and careful, "What are you talking about? What room? Denise, I need you to tell me the truth right now. Did you know about that room?" "Gary, I have no idea what you're talking about. I need to go. I've got a client dinner starting in 20 minutes. We'll talk when I'm home Sunday." And she hung up before I could say another word, which was, in 16 years of marriage, something she had never once done to me before. Here's something nobody tells you about the moment you realize your spouse might be lying to you about something this serious. The silence afterward is its own kind of evidence. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that call, staring at the basement door standing open at the top of the stairs, and I understood that whatever came next, I couldn't afford to handle it the way I wanted to, which was to drive to the Atlanta airport myself and demand answers in person. Wexler had made it clear, gently but firmly, that this was now an active investigation, and that anything I did on my own could complicate it. The next morning, Detective Priya Ellison, no relation, as she pointed out with a tired half-smile, to the various Prius apparently working cases all over the Midwest that season, called to set up a formal interview and asked me to bring any documentation I had for the house, including the original blueprints if I still had them. I did. I'd kept them in a manila folder in the garage since we bought the place, more out of habit than any real need. We met at the Marsh Hollow Police Station, a squat brick building 2 blocks off the main square, and Ellison spread the blueprints across the table between us, comparing them line by line against photographs the crime scene unit had taken of the basement the day before. "This room isn't on the original plans," she said, tapping the corner where the water heater sat. "According to this, that space back there should just be foundation wall. Someone built this out after the house was constructed, and did it well enough that it wouldn't be obvious unless you were specifically looking for it. Or, apparently, moving totes to check a duct line." "How long ago?" I asked. "Building materials suggest sometime in the last 4 to 5 years, based on the drywall compound and the type of screws used in the hasps." She looked up at me. You said you've owned the house 11 years. Does that timeline mean anything to you? It did. 4, maybe 5 years back was roughly when Denise's work trips had started becoming more frequent, stretching from occasional overnight trips to regular 3- and 4-day stretches, always to different cities, always explained away with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this enough times that the explanations came without hesitation. Ellison asked whether Marisol Reyes meant anything to me. I told her the name meant nothing at all. She told me, carefully, that Marisol had been reported missing from a small town outside of Louisville almost 14 months earlier, that her family had filed reports, distributed flyers, done everything a family does when someone simply vanishes, and that as far as the department could tell so far, nobody had connected her disappearance to Marsh Hollow, Indiana, until Curtis Odom moved a few plastic totes to check a duct line. I sat with that information for a long moment, feeling something in my chest go cold and very still. Louisville, one of the cities Denise traveled to regularly for work. If you've been with me a while, you know I don't move on instinct alone, especially not when a woman's safety and an active investigation are both at stake. Before I tell you what came next, I need you to understand something about patience in a moment like this. The temptation to drive straight to the airport, to scream, to demand answers in person, is enormous, and giving into it can destroy the very evidence that might finally explain what happened to Marisol Reyes and how long this had been going on. Detective Ellison asked me not to contact Denise again, outside of normal, ordinary conversation, until they'd had a chance to pull financial records, phone records, and travel history. If she's involved in this, and I want to be careful, we don't know that for certain yet, but if she is, the moment she knows we're actively building a case, whatever she hasn't already destroyed will disappear fast, Ellison told me. Right now, to her, this looks like an accident. A furnace technician who stumbled onto something. That's actually the best position we can be in. So for the second time in a story I never expected to be living, I found myself performing normalcy while people with actual expertise did the work I couldn't do alone. Denise came home that Sunday as scheduled, her suitcase wheels clattering across the kitchen tile, and I hugged her at the door and felt absolutely nothing except the specific, sick awareness of every question I wasn't allowed to ask yet. I can't believe that happened, she said that first night, sitting across from me at dinner, her voice pitched exactly right, somewhere between shock and sympathy. That poor girl. I still don't understand how something like that could be back there without either of us knowing. I watched her say it, watched her fork move food around her plate without really eating any of it, and I thought about 4 separate padlocks, installed at 4 separate times, and I said, yeah, I still can't wrap my head around it either, and I meant every word of that sentence, just not in the way she thought I did. Ellison's team moved carefully over the following 2.5 weeks. Phone records showed that Denise's cell had pinged off towers in a rural area outside Louisville on at least 6 occasions over the past 14 months. Trips that didn't match any client visits listed on her company's official travel logs. Trips her employer, when quietly subpoenaed, had no record of authorizing or reimbursing at all. Financial records showed cash withdrawals from an account I didn't know existed, a separate checking account opened at a credit union 2 counties over, funded by transfers from our joint savings in amounts just small enough that I'd never once noticed the difference on our monthly statements. And then there was the hardware store receipt Ellison found buried in 6 months of purchase history at a home improvement chain in Fort Wayne. 4 padlocks, different brands, purchased on 4 separate visits, spread out over roughly a year, paid for in cash, on a security camera timestamp that placed a woman matching Denise's build and hair color at that specific register each time. Her face never quite turning fully toward the camera, as though she'd learned, at some point, exactly where not to look. Here's something nobody tells you about discovering the true scale of something like this. The numbers alone don't capture it. It's the pattern, the deliberate spacing of 4 separate hardware store trips over a year, the careful selection of a credit union 2 counties away, the quiet, patient construction of an entire secret architecture inside a marriage that from the outside looked, to every single person who knew us, completely ordinary. I thought about every one of Denise's work trips over the past 5 years, every kiss goodbye in the driveway, every ceramic bird added to that windowsill collection, and I found myself recalculating an entire marriage against evidence I never wanted to have. On day 18 of the investigation, Ellison called me in for what she described as a critical update and asked me to come alone, without telling Denise where I was going. Marisol Reyes, recovering steadily at a hospital under a level of security the department wasn't discussing publicly, had given a full statement the day before, and Ellison wanted me to hear the broad strokes directly from her rather than through a filtered version later. According to Marisol's statement, she had been approached 14 months earlier, outside a diner in Louisville, by a woman offering a well-paying, live-in caretaking position for an elderly relative, an offer that had seemed, at the time, like an unusual stroke of luck for someone between jobs. She had gotten into that woman's car willingly. She did not remember much of the drive itself. She woke up, disoriented and afraid, already inside the room behind my basement wall, and she had been there, by her own accounting, corroborated loosely against timeline markers she'd tracked using meal deliveries and light changes under the door, for just over 13 months. She's described her captor consistently as a woman, Ellison told me, watching my face carefully as she said it. Late 30s to mid-40s, shoulder-length brown hair, a habit of humming while she brought meals down, always slightly off-key, like she was singing along to something only she could hear. I sat very still in that interview room, feeling the last thin thread of doubt I'd been holding on to, the small, stubborn hope that somehow this had nothing to do with Denise, that some other explanation existed, finally give way completely. "There's one more thing," Ellison said, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table toward me, a printout of a text message extracted from a burner phone found, that morning, hidden inside a hollowed-out hardcover book on Denise's nightstand, a book I must have walked past 100 times without ever once opening it. The message, sent 9 days after Curtis Odom's first text to me about the locked door, was addressed to a contact saved only as M, and it read, "Situation getting complicated on my end. Might need your help relocating something before this gets worse. Can you still get access to that property upstate? Denise sent this message 4 days ago," Ellison said quietly, "while she was living in your house with you, sleeping in your bed, having dinner with you every night. She's not confused about what happened, Gary. She's actively planning around it. I did not confront Denise that night. I did not pack a bag and leave. I did not do the thing every instinct in my body was screaming at me to do, which was to stand in our kitchen and demand she explain herself to my face. I understood, by then, that confronting her directly would only hand her the one thing she still didn't have. Advance warning that we knew everything. Warning that would let her disappear, destroy the remaining evidence, or worse, reach out to whoever M was and set some final, desperate plan into motion before Ellison's team could close the case cleanly. Ellison asked me to continue exactly as before for a short, defined window. She estimated 4 to 6 days, no longer, while a joint task force with agencies in 2 other counties tracked the burner phone's activity and attempted to identify M before making any arrest that might tip Denise off prematurely. My sister-in-law, Denise's own younger sister Paula, unknowingly became part of that final stretch simply by calling to check in on how I was holding up, and in a moment of exhausted honesty, I told her enough, carefully, at Ellison's guidance, framed only as, "The investigation is still ongoing, and there are some things about Denise's recent behavior that don't add up," that Paula, horrified, agreed to keep me looped in on anything unusual Denise mentioned to her, without ever revealing that I'd told her anything at all. So for 6 more days, I performed a marriage I no longer recognized. I sat across from Denise at dinner and asked about her day. I let her fall asleep against my shoulder during a movie on our couch, her ceramic birds lined up on the windowsill behind us, dusted, as always, that past Sunday morning. I hugged her goodbye each morning when she left for work, and felt nothing but the specific, hollow awareness of a text message, signed only M, sitting somewhere on a device I wasn't supposed to know existed. On the 6th night, close to 11, my phone buzzed with a message from Ellison, 6 words long. "We have him. Stay where you are." 10 minutes later, headlights swept slowly across our living room curtains and came to a stop in the driveway, engines idling, more than one vehicle by the sound of it, And Denise, sitting beside me on the couch, went very still, her hand freezing halfway to the remote, her whole body suddenly rigid in a way I'd never seen from her before in 16 years of marriage. "Gary," she said, very quietly, not looking at me, staring instead at the front door. "Whatever they tell you tonight, I need you to remember that I love you. That part was never a lie." There was a knock at the door, firm and official, and Denise's hand found mine on the couch cushion between us, gripping it hard, the way you grip something right before you fall.